20 years I've been working in the financial sector, was chief economist at Nordea in Finland until last fall. Now I'm a private entrepreneur, or at least self-employed. I'm not sure whether entrepreneur fits my job role either, but I'm working as a self-employed economist. But the topic I've been asked to talk about is I was given this title for my speech, from rubber boots to cell phones, and then what. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the reference here to rubber boots. Nokia is a company you might have heard of. It used to be known in Finland because everybody had Nokia rubber boots. It's not really the case that Nokia was a company making rubber boots that all of a sudden started to make mobile phones. Nokia used to be an industrial conglomerate which made a lot of things, such as rubber boots and computers and sort of everything in between. The nice things with having a closed home market with little competition, then you can be the best in very many things and being very efficient and profitable, or at least profitable. But then when Finland opened up, then the time of conglomerates was over in Finland as it was in most other countries, and Nokia specialized into cell phones. And then for a few years, for a decade, Nokia was the dominating factor in the global telecom market. That was a huge boost to the Finnish economy, and then of course this fairy tale took a turn for the worse, and Nokia mobile phones is no more, or it's Microsoft mobile phones now. And actually, this shock to the Finnish economy happened at the same time that the global economy went down. So the strange thing actually, although I'm not sure that's how most observers see it, but the strange thing to me is how well the Finnish economy has done, given what I'm going to, given that we have had the worst global and European recession since the Second World War, and Finland has had an enormous shock. So why doesn't Finland look like, well, Portugal or Greece or something? Well, in the Finnish debate, we almost think that Finland is like Greece, but that's another story. Perhaps. But basics. This is telecom industry as a share, the value added of the telecom industry as a share of Finnish GDP. Well, electronics industry, it's mostly telecom, especially during the year. So at the peak, the success story started in '95 when Nokia mobile phones started to conquer the market share, and of course the mobile phone markets globally took off, until it peaked at the turn of the millennium. Then mobile phones was about 5% of Finnish GDP. And it stuck there for the next 6-7 years. From that point, actually, Nokia still as a company still continued to grow for a few years, but production shifted increasingly away from Finland to other parts. So it's not just the fortunes of Nokia that affected this, but also where Nokia shifted production. But then came iPhone. All of a sudden, Nokia wasn't the hot stuff anymore, and well, you can see from the chart there. So basically, we lost in a few years almost 5% of our GDP. I mean, that's the direct shock. Remember, usually, well, the previous speaker said it, that one person in the tech sector employs other people. So if you start to think about multiplier effect, should you think that this has caused an additional effect, should have caused an additional effect on the Finnish domestic demand. Look at it in share of what happens to Finnish exports. This is Finnish exports of goods. The red is telecom equipment, which basically has shrunk to zero. If we look at where we were in 2008, then export of telecom equipment was 18% of our total export of goods. It has completely disappeared, so Finnish exports, if we look at the rest of exports, they're roughly on the same level as they were in 2008. Of course, you could see the impact of the global economic shock on the rest of exports. But basically, we've lost a fifth of our exports. So the Finnish economy must be in a huge depression. And then, if we look at unemployment, the blue line there isn't Finland, that's Euro area. The red line is Finland, the yellow line is Sweden. So it doesn't show up in unemployment figures. So we just lost 5% of our GDP, we lost 20% of our exports, and our unemployment is basically going nowhere. Now, yes, it has risen once. Considering that if we look at the rest of Europe and the shock we've seen, it's not that high. Of course, there are explanatory factors. We have an increase in hidden unemployment. It doesn't show up in the figures. So if it look at what I try to measure here is people engaged in employment programs conducted by the government, different kinds of training or make work employment schemes. And the blue line sort of tries to capture discouraged workers, that is, workers that are claiming unemployment benefits but are not counted as unemployed in the unemployment statistics because they're not actively seeking for work. They've given up. They're just getting benefits mechanically. So that's up by 3%. So yeah, there is some hidden. But I'm sure this is a phenomenon that is familiar also in the rest of the world, that we have part of the deterioration that doesn't show up. So we can look at an employment figure and employment rate. First, one factor explaining this is, of course, that in Finland, as in Sweden, we were told here earlier, the labor force is no longer growing, it's actually starting to shrink, so that accounts for part of it, but that's no difference from Finland to the rest of the world. So, yeah, if we look at the employment rate, Sweden has done clearly better than Finland, but again, compared to the rest of Europe, Finland is not doing that badly. So, the message I'm trying to say that the Finnish economy has, for some kind of reason, weathered that Nokia shock fairly well. You can see this also if you look at private consumption. If you've just lost a huge part of your revenue, you would expect the Finns would now be a lot poorer, really suffering. But actually consumption is up from what it was in 2008. We've done better than the rest of Europe. Again, not as well as Sweden. But I could argue that the Finnish economy would be doing almost as good as Sweden if Nokia hadn't collapsed. Of course, Nokia did collapse, so this is just hypothetical, but that's, if you want, that's of course a question of perspective. if you listen to the debate in Finland going on right now, the general conviction is that there is something seriously wrong with the Finnish economy because we're doing so badly. And my perspective is, look, we had one thing that went terribly wrong. Nokia was outsmarted by iPhone and by Android, that made the wrong choices, and that sector crashed. And still, we're doing nicely. That's
Just sort of, I mean, doing nicely, you're compared with the euro area, which
Sure.
is, I mean, you're, both of the really worst countries in Europe are inside the euro area, so.
sure, but yeah, sure. But even, I mean, even compared to Sweden, which is not in the euro area and is definitely not the. My point is that for a country that has just lost almost a fifth of its exports in the worst global recession, I mean, it doesn't convince me necessarily that there is something structurally wrong with how the economy is working. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, it could be doing better. Yes.